I stood on the small patch of concrete outside the apartment door, my suitcase balanced against my knee, and stared at the note taped above the handle. It was written in her neat looping script, "I need space. Please leave." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just 5 words that reduced everything we'd built to a single demand. The evening air was cool, almost sharp against my cheeks. I remember shifting the weight of the bag on my shoulder, feeling the strap dig into my skin, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she'd open the door smiling and say, "I didn't mean it. Come back inside." But the apartment behind that door was silent. No footsteps, no voices, only the faint hum of the refrigerator on the other side of the wall. I'd lived there for nearly 2 years. It had been our safe place, our shared home, or so I thought. We'd chosen the curtains together, the dishes, the color of the rug in the living room. We'd fought over the thermostat in the winter, over whether to keep the couch or replace it with something new. Those fights had always ended in laughter, in late-night ice cream runs, in whispered apologies before bed. But none of that seemed to matter now. I took out my phone, stared at the screen thumb hovering over her contact. Part of me wanted to call, to beg, to demand an answer, but another part of me, quieter but stronger, told me to put the phone away. I did. I slid it back into my pocket and took a deep breath. The sky above was turning indigo, the first stars flickering into view. I looked up at them, feeling smaller than I had in years. I thought about all the times I'd put her needs first, the way I'd rearranged my work schedule when she needed help, how I'd learned to cook her favorite meals even though I was a terrible cook at first, how I'd given up nights out with friends just to sit beside her on the couch when she was feeling low. I thought about how she used to look at me like I was enough, and how somewhere along the way that look had turned to something else, annoyance, impatience, maybe even disgust. I didn't cry. I was too tired, too hollow. Instead, I reached for the handle out of habit fingers, brushing the cool metal, then let go. I didn't need to test it to know it was locked. She'd made sure of that. She wanted me gone, and she'd made it, so I couldn't even turn the knob and pretend for one last moment that this was still my home. So I stepped back. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and let the weight of it steady me. I took a final glance at the note. "I need space. Please leave." The politeness of it almost made me laugh. She hadn't said, "Get out," or "Don't come back." She'd said, "Please," as if courtesy could soften the blow. I turned and walked down the narrow hallway, the echo of my footsteps in that dim corridor, the only sound I could hold on to. With every step, I felt something in me go quiet. Not broken, just quiet. Like a door had closed inside me too. I didn't know where I would sleep that night. I didn't know what I would eat tomorrow. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't beg for a place in her life anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. The day after she locked me out, I woke up on a stranger's couch. A friend of a friend offered me a place for the night, but I knew it couldn't last. My bag sat by my feet, half unzipped, the zipper stuck on a frayed piece of fabric. I stared at it for a long time, as if the tangle of threads could tell me how I'd ended up here. My mind kept drifting backward to the nights when we were still close, when she'd call me in the middle of the night, just to hear my voice, when we'd make plans for our future over takeout containers on the floor. I had believed in those nights. I had believed in us. We'd met at a volunteer event. She was wearing a green jacket, hair pulled back, talking to a group of kids about recycling. Her smile had pulled me in the easy way she laughed and made people feel safe. Back then, I thought she was the strongest person I knew. And maybe she was in a way I didn't understand until much later. We started as friends. She'd ask me for rides to work, then coffee, then dinner. Before I knew it, I was staying over at her place more than my own. I didn't mind. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be needed. At first, it felt good, like I was building something solid. We shared everything: bills, chores, late-night worries. I thought that meant we were partners. But somewhere along the line, the scales tipped. She stopped offering to pay her share of rent. She stopped asking how my day was, or if I was okay when I worked late. She started saying I was too much, too eager, too invested. I thought I could fix it if I just tried harder. So I tried. I picked up extra shifts. I covered her part of the rent when she said she'd pay me back later. I brought home groceries, even when it meant skipping lunch to save money. I stopped going out with friends because she said she felt lonely when I wasn't there. I told myself this was love, that love meant compromise, that love meant giving everything and never expecting it back. But love isn't supposed to feel like a debt you can't repay. It's not supposed to feel like you're one mistake away from being replaced. I see that now. I see how every small moment added up to the day she decided she didn't need me anymore. How every time she looked at me like I was a burden, she was laying the foundation for the final moment, when she'd close the door and leave me standing in the hall. I thought about the last dinner we had together. She'd been scrolling on her phone the whole time, barely listening. When I asked if everything was okay, she just said, "You're too intense." I didn't know how to argue with that. So I stopped talking, stopped explaining, and in that silence, she found the space she wanted. A space without me. I pulled the zipper on my bag until it gave way, finally sliding shut. Outside, the city was waking up cars, honking dogs, barking the world moving on without me. I took a breath and stood up. I didn't know what the day would bring, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done living in the shadow of someone else's convenience. I was done carrying the weight of a love that had already let me go. The first night on my own was the hardest. I found a spot at the back of the 24-hour cafe where no one noticed me. I ordered a small coffee I didn't want just to stay. I watched the barista wipe tables, watched people come and go, watched the hours blur into a quiet, aching dawn. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying every word she'd ever said to me, every look she'd given that I'd mistaken for love. The next day, I found a bench at the park. It was cold, and I didn't have a blanket, but I pulled my jacket tight and told myself it would be enough. I had a little money saved, just enough to buy cheap sandwiches and bus fare if I needed to move. I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want pity or the kind of help that comes with conditions. I wanted to prove to myself that I could survive this, that her rejection didn't define the rest of my story. I kept to myself. During the day, I'd sit in libraries and waiting rooms, any place with a chair and a little warmth. I read old magazines and watched people from a distance. There was a strange comfort in knowing the world kept turning. People laughed, argued, lived, unaware of the girl who'd lost her place in it. At night, I'd walk until I found somewhere safe enough to rest. I didn't think about her. Or at least, I tried not to. I focused on the next hour, the next meal, the next place to sit down. Survival has a way of shrinking your world to what's right in front of you. I learned how to sleep lightly, how to keep my bag close, and my coat zipped to my chin. I learned that silence is sometimes safer than speaking, that not everyone who offers a smile means it. I learned that you can feel invisible even in a crowd, and that invisibility can be both a curse and a shield. I thought about her sometimes. I wondered if she was sleeping well, if she'd even noticed I was gone. I wondered if she told people I'd left because I couldn't handle her boundaries, if she painted herself as the one who was wronged. But I didn't reach out. I didn't want her to hear the crack in my voice or see the tired lines on my face. I didn't want to give her the chance to call me needy one more time. One morning, I woke up to the sound of birds, the cold seeping into my bones. I sat up on that park bench and realized I hadn't cried in days. There was no one to see me, no one to comfort me, and somehow, that made the pain a little easier to carry. I was alone, but I was still standing, still breathing. I didn't know how long I could keep going like that, but I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't go back. Not to her apartment, not to her apologies if they ever came. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I'd find a way to start over, no matter how many nights it took. And in that small, stubborn promise, I found a piece of strength I didn't know I had. I found a job at a small corner store after a week of wandering. The manager didn't ask questions about where I'd come from or why I looked so worn. He just pointed to the shelves and said, "If you're willing to work hard, you can start today." I said yes before he could change his mind. I learned how to stock boxes, how to smile at customers, even when my legs ached from standing. I swept the floors at night, cleaned the windows in the morning, counted every dollar in the cash register like it was my own. The pay was small, but it was enough to buy a warm meal and save a few bills in a jar I kept hidden under my mattress at the cheap room I found. It wasn't much, just a square of space with peeling wallpaper and a bed that creaked every time I moved. But it was mine. No one could tell me to leave. No one could lock me out. Each night, I lay on that thin mattress and told myself I was one day closer to something better. I tried not to think about her, but memories have a way of creeping in when the room goes quiet. I'd remember the nights we stayed up talking, her head on my chest, her laughter soft in the dark. I'd remember the way she used to hold my hand like it was an anchor. And then I'd remember the note on the door and feel the cold edge of it all over again. I didn't let those memories break me. I used them. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about how she'd looked at me that last day, like I was a weight she couldn't wait to drop. And I told myself, I will not be a burden. I will not be disposable. I will not be what she said I was. The store became my world. It was a place where no one cared about my past, only whether the shelves were neat and the customers were happy. I liked that. The simplicity of it. The way hard work didn't need an explanation. It didn't matter if I was tired or sad, what mattered was that the job got done. And in that, I found a kind of peace. Sometimes I'd catch myself watching the families who came in, the kids clutching candy bars, the parents arguing over which cereal to buy. I wondered if I'd ever have that. A place where I belonged without question, where love didn't come with conditions. I didn't know. But I knew I wouldn't settle for less than that again. At the end of each day, I'd walk back to my little room, the jar of money a little fuller, my shoulders a little straighter. I wasn't healed, not yet. But I was building something new, one shift at a time. And that was enough to keep me going. I didn't tell anyone about her or what had happened. I didn't want their pity. I wanted to earn my own future free from her shadow. And each night, as I closed my eyes, I reminded myself I am not what she left behind. I am what I choose to become next. The call came late on a Tuesday night. I was closing up the store, turning the key in the lock, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, ready to sink into my bed and forget the world for a few hours. But the number was familiar. My breath caught in my throat before I even saw her name on the screen. She didn't waste time with small talk. Her voice was thin, ragged. "I need help." She said no greeting, no apology, just 3 words that felt both like an accusation and a plea. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the city around me, the traffic, the distant laughter, the wind rustling trash in the gutters. I swallowed the ache in my chest. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. "I'm sick," she whispered. "I can't breathe. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I said nothing. I thought about the nights I'd spent alone, the nights I'd wondered if she even remembered my name. I thought about that note she'd left, how she'd locked the door and shut me out without a second glance. I thought about how easy it would be to hang up, to let her face her illness the way I'd faced the street alone. But I didn't, because no matter how much she'd hurt me, I couldn't be the person who turned away when someone was scared. "Where are you?" I asked finally. She gave me the address of a rundown apartment in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I didn't ask how she'd ended up there. I didn't ask why she'd called me and not someone else. I just said, "I'm on my way." Then I hung up, slid my phone into my pocket, and started walking. The bus ride was long and silent, the windows streaked with rain. I kept my head down, hands clenched in my lap, heart pounding like I was marching to some old battle I thought I'd already fought. When I got to her building, she was waiting by the door, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her skin looked pale, her lips dry and cracked. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked so small, so breakable. Not the girl who'd once told me I was too much, who'd once said she needed space. Just a human being, fragile and afraid. "I didn't know who else to call," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't tell her it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I didn't remind her of the nights I'd slept on benches, the days I'd gone hungry, so she could be comfortable. I just took her arm and guided her down the steps. "Let's get you to the hospital," I said. She leaned into me, shivering, and for a brief moment, I felt the old ache of what we'd been. But I didn't let it swallow me. I was here because it was the right thing to do, not because I still loved her. not because I was clinging to the past, just because I refused to let someone else suffer if I could help. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet desperation. I held her arm as we walked through the double doors, the nurse at the front desk giving me a look that was part curiosity, part pity. I didn't care what she saw. All I cared about was making sure the woman next to me didn't collapse before we could find her a bed. They took her name, her symptoms, and then wheeled her away for tests. I sat in the plastic chair by the window, my hands resting in my lap, my mind numb. I watched the rain slide down the glass, each drop a silent echo of the nights I'd spent alone. She'd once told me hospitals made her feel safe, the way nurses always moved with purpose, the way the white walls felt like a promise of something clean and controlled. I wondered if she still believed that now that she was the one lying on a gurney. When they let me in to see her, she was curled on her side, an oxygen mask over her face. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. She looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen her. The room was cold and sterile, the beep of the monitors steady and calm. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her, my hands folded to keep from reaching for her. She didn't speak. I didn't either. There was nothing left to say. The past lay between us like an ocean too deep to cross. She shifted once, a soft sound of discomfort, and I rose to pour her a cup of water from the pitcher at the bedside. She took it without meeting my eyes. I watched her throat bob as she drank, her fingers trembling around the cup. "Thank you," she murmured so low I almost didn't hear it. I nodded but said nothing. I wasn't here for gratitude. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here because I couldn't forget what it felt like to be the one no one would help, because no matter how she'd treated me, I refused to let her suffer alone. Hours passed. I sat and watched the monitors, the drip of fluids into her veins, the way her breath rattled in her chest. Nurses came and went, adjusting tubes and recording numbers. I moved out of the way when they needed space, stepped back when they pushed her bed higher, but I didn't leave. I stayed because she had no one else. Because once she'd had me, and even if she didn't want me anymore, I couldn't make myself walk away. When she fell asleep, her face smoothed out all the sharp edges of her anger, and fear softened by exhaustion. I let myself look at her, then really look at her. The girl who'd made me homeless, who'd taught me the difference between love and dependence, who'd forced me to build a life from nothing. I felt no hate, only a quiet, tired acceptance. She stirred in her sleep, a small sound that might have been my name. I didn't answer. I didn't reach for her hand. I just sat there, a silent witness to her pain, a quiet testament to the fact that sometimes caring doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need to be earned. It just is. The days at the hospital blurred together in a slow, steady rhythm. I came every morning before my shift at the store, and again at night, when the halls were quieter and the air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I'd bring her small things, her favorite tea, a fresh blanket, a book she never opened. She never asked me to, but I did it anyway. Because even though she had taken so much from me, I couldn't pretend she was just another patient in that room. She didn't ask why I was there. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she knew I wouldn't answer. She'd watch me move around the room, adjusting the blinds so the sun wouldn't hurt her eyes, straightening the tray table, fluffing her pillow. Sometimes she'd whisper thanks, but mostly she stayed silent. I didn't mind. The silence felt safer than the words we'd once thrown at each other like knives. One night, I came in to find her sitting up, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, a pale flush in her cheeks. She looked stronger. I almost smiled, but stopped myself. I didn't want her to think I was hoping for anything more than this moment of calm. She cleared her throat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice was thin, but there was something sharp beneath it. Accusation. Guilt, maybe both. I sat in the chair by her bed, folding my hands in my lap. "Because you need help," I said. It was the truth, and it was enough. She didn't push further. She just nodded, turning her head to stare at the wall. I could tell she wanted to ask more, to demand an explanation that would make this easier to swallow. But I didn't have one to give. When the nurses came in to check her vitals, I stepped back, letting them work. She watched me from the corner of her eye, like she was trying to read the thoughts I kept locked away. But I didn't let her see. Because this wasn't about us. It wasn't about the past. It was about making sure she didn't have to face this alone, even if she'd forced me to face everything else on my own. The next day, I brought her fresh fruit from the market, arranging it carefully on a paper plate. She looked at it for a long time before reaching for a piece of melon. "You always did take care of me," she said softly. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't open wounds better left closed. We never talked about the night she locked me out. We never talked about the nights I spent sleeping on benches, or the mornings I woke up to the cold bite of loneliness. Those things belonged to a chapter I'd already closed. But in the quiet moments when I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, when I held her cup steady as she sipped water, I think she knew. I think she saw that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that kindness didn't mean weakness. When she slept, I would stand at the window, watching the city lights blink in the distance. I thought about the life I was building for myself, the small room that was mine alone, the job that paid the bills I owed to no one else. I thought about how far I'd come from the night she locked me out. And I knew in that silence that I'd never let anyone take that from me again. She stayed in the hospital for another week. Each day, her color returned a little more, her voice grew a little stronger. I watched her reclaim pieces of herself with every breath she took, and I wondered if she'd ever truly see the cost of what she'd done. But I didn't let those thoughts live too long. I focused on the small things, the way she held the spoon I handed her, the way she closed her eyes when the nurses checked her vitals. She was healing, and that was enough for now. When the doctor finally said she could go home, I was the one who pushed her wheelchair to the entrance. The air outside smelled of rain and new beginnings. She looked up at me, eyes searching, and I braced myself for an apology that never came. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, but we both knew I already had. The nurse handed me a bag of medications and discharge papers. I signed them without comment, slipping them into the worn folder I carried everywhere. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then she shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Thank you," she said the words careful, like she was testing how they felt in her mouth. I nodded, not because it was enough, but because there was nothing else to do. I called a cab to take her home. When it arrived, I helped her to her feet, steadying her as she climbed in. I closed the door gently behind her, my reflection in the rain-specked window, a ghost I barely recognized. She looked back at me once, her eyes soft, but I didn't hold the gaze. I stepped back as the cab pulled away, the tires hissing on wet pavement. I stood there for a long time, the rain seeping through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. It felt like the final chapter of a book I hadn't wanted to write, but one I was proud to have finished. She was gone, and I was still standing. That was enough of a victory. When I walked back to my room, the city felt quieter. The small space I called home welcomed me like an old friend. I hung up my jacket, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window as the rain continued to fall. I thought about how far I'd come, how many nights I'd spent trying to make sense of what had happened. But as I looked out at the slick streets, I realized I didn't need to make sense of it anymore. Some things don't need to be explained to be true. I didn't know if she would ever understand the depth of what I'd done for her, or if she'd ever see me as more than the shadow she'd once called too much. But I knew one thing: I hadn't done it for her. I'd done it for me, to prove to myself that I could still choose compassion over bitterness, that I could still be kind even when kindness had cost me everything before. The rain kept falling steady and soft, and I let it wash away the last traces of her voice in my mind. I knew this was the end, not just of her illness, but of whatever hold she'd had on me. And in that quiet final goodbye, I felt something like freedom. I woke up the next morning with the sun streaming through the curtains, the warmth of it soft against my face. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't have to wonder if my phone would buzz with her name, or if I'd hear her voice in my dreams. I stretched slowly, feeling the tightness in my shoulders, the weight of 100 silent nights finally start to lift. I made tea in the chipped mug I'd found at a thrift store, the one that said, "You're enough," in faded blue letters. I sat at the window, watching the city come alive. Cars honked, people hurried down the sidewalk, and I realized I was okay. Maybe not healed, not entirely, but whole enough to stand on my own 2 feet, to claim this small, quiet life as mine. She hadn't called again. Part of me had expected she might, that she'd find another excuse, another reason to need me. But she didn't. And I knew I wouldn't have answered if she had. I'd done what I could. I'd chosen to help when no one else would, and now I was choosing to move forward. I was done living in the echoes of someone else's mistakes. Some people think that kindness is weakness, that letting someone back in after they've hurt you is a sign you're still trapped in their orbit. But I don't believe that. I think kindness is strength. I think it's the choice to hold on to your humanity when the world tries to strip it away. She made me homeless. She made me question my worth. But I still chose to show up when she needed help. And that was my power, not hers. I poured the last of my tea down the sink and watched the steam curl up into nothing. There was a strange peace in knowing I had no more debts to pay, no more explanations to give. My life was my own again, and that was enough. I didn't know what the future would look like. Maybe I'd stay in this little room, save up for something bigger. Maybe I'd find someone who saw me for everything I was, someone who didn't flinch at the way I cared too much. Or maybe I'd just keep walking forward one day at a time, proud of every step I took, without her shadow at my back. The sun was bright and gentle as I stepped outside, the air cool but full of promise. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light, free. And if you're reading this now, if you've ever been pushed out, blamed, or made to feel like you were too much, know this: you are not too much. You are exactly enough. You have the right to take up space, to care deeply, and to keep your heart soft, even when it's been broken. I'd love to hear from you. What choice would you have made? Would you have walked away, or would you have stayed like I did? Drop your thoughts below, and let's remind each other, kindness never makes us weak. It only makes us stronger.